This video focuses on the first of the two gerrymandering cases that you need to know in the Congress unit. So this one's called Baker v. Carr, and it's from 1962. Just to know who's disputing in the case, Baker is a resident of Memphis, Tennessee, big city in Tennessee, and Carr is the Tennessee government official whose office is responsible for redrawing the congressional districts. Remember, this is done by the states. All right, so here's the background. This dispute basically centers around the fact that Tennessee is using outdated census information to draw their congressional districts. They're essentially using data from 1900 to draw the districts in 1951. So this is going to cause problems because this data is way outdated. And one of the major things that had happened in not just Tennessee, but in all parts of the United States in the first part of the 1900s was the idea that urban populations, cities, really kind of exploded. And if we're using census data from the 1900s to draw the districts in the 1950s, we're probably going to miss out on this population shift. So what this meant was that Tennessee was essentially drawing districts in which the urban areas were underrepresented and the rural areas were overrepresented. And just to give you a little snapshot of this, Memphis, right, one of the largest cities in Tennessee, had 200 million people living within that congressional district, and they had one representative. Every district has a representative. A neighboring rural district only had 10,000 people living in it, but they also had a representative. So the argument is that this isn't fair because you have wildly different population numbers living within the same district, but they have the same amount of representation. All right. So you know that for all of these mandatory cases, there's always a part of the Constitution that's in dispute. This part of the Constitution, right, that's relevant to this dispute is the 14th Amendment, and more specifically, the Equal Protection Clause. The 14th Amendment is important for a couple different reasons that we'll talk about later in the year, but it is the basis for discrimination lawsuits because the latter part of this amendment promises that everybody's going to be treated equally under the eyes of the law. So if you're being discriminated against for any reason, your argument is that your 14th Amendment right to equal protection, right, the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, right, is basically being violated. And in this particular situation, Baker, this resident of Tennessee, resident of Memphis, was arguing that he was being discriminated against because there were so many more people living in his district, yet they had the same amount of representation as a smaller rural district. That the people living in the rural districts, that their vote was kind of worth more than his. So the issue that the Supreme Court has to decide is whether or not these unequal population districts are discriminatory against urban voters. And the Supreme Court's decision is 6-3 yes, right? So basically tells Tennessee that you're not doing this correctly. The importance of this is that it establishes a principle known as one person, one vote. This is going to always be the indication that we're talking about Baker v. Carr, this little slogan that goes along with it. And basically what this simply means is that from this point forward, all districts have to try their best to include roughly the same number of people within them. You could draw funny shaped districts, they could be odd looking, but they have to include roughly the same number of people. And that number today is about 761,000 people. So Baker v. Carr is important because it establishes the principle of one person, one vote, which basically means that all of the districts for the House of Reps have to include roughly the same number of people within them.